Hi, everybody. My name is Natasha Tracy, and I am the blog manager here at HealthyPlace. I also write the Breaking Bipolar blog, as well as my own blog, The Bipolar Burble. Today, we're going to be talking about complex PTSD, and that's often known as C-PTSD. And this is a psychological disorder, and this can develop in response to prolonged, repeated experience of interpersonal trauma in a context where the person has little to no chance of escape. I will be introducing our first guest in a minute, and then I'm going to do a short interview, and we'll open up the floor, of course, to all of your questions. We'll also be bringing out a psychiatrist, Dr. Harry Croft, and he's going to talk about the treatment of C-PTSD in about 15 or 20 minutes. So as we go along, please feel free to comment in the text box, and we will post those on the screen. As well, I'll be posting a link in the chat box, and that will have more information on PTSD and C-PTSD at HealthyPlace.com. Our first guest is Melanie. So Melanie experienced a series of traumatic events which started in early childhood. From that point forward, she always felt anxious, introverted, and depressed, and she even battled suicidal thoughts from the age of 9 years old. She told us she sought help this time last year when she started to feel completely overwhelmed and suffocated. She was no longer functioning well in what she felt was a normal capacity. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for agreeing to share your story.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We're not going to delve into the specific events, the traumatic events that you went through, of course, but to give some perspective to the audience, could you share how many times you were exposed to trauma and over what period of time?
The earliest I remember was probably around the ages of 2 to 3, and I grew up in a very emotionally, sometimes physically, psychologically abusive household with often I had alcoholic stepfathers, and there was a lot of police involvement and child social services. So a lot of this came from adult figures that were supposed to keep me safe that didn't, and instead put me in positions of not being safe. At the same time as always, leaving me alone. I would be alone sometimes. Where I remember I was 4 or 5 being left alone, or for many hours at a time. The same thing is like I remember hiding in cupboards, and I could remember the fear that I felt because I was trying to escape from my stepfather. I remember being coached to lie to social services when they came so I wouldn't be taken away. I remember lots of stuff. Like there was a few times where there was attempted abductions, and then my sister was actually abducted for a few days, and I remember the police bringing her home when I was really young. I was probably like 3, and I would wake up to her having panic attacks when she was really little, and we would share a room, so we'd have to support each other through it all. I had siblings who were very involved in gang activity and drug life that would threaten to kill me, would stand in my doorway at nighttime and like make motions that they were going to kill me, and the people that were supposed to keep me safe weren't doing anything about it. Where they were going, "Wow, he wouldn't hurt you. He's your brother. Like nothing's going on." And if I got told I was doing something, I was making it up, I was lying, my memories weren't true, that didn't happen. And so like you start to really doubt yourself of what is reality, what's the truth and what's not. Am I making stuff up? Is what happened happening? And it wasn't until I started sharing some of my experience with my sister that she had the same memories. So I was like, we can't both be wrong. Like it's just not possible. And I also had some sexual assault from family members when I was younger, as well as trusted people like babysitters. And when that was brought up, it was kind of just brushed off under the rug and was made to not be a big deal. So throughout all of that, it just kind of, I didn't realize how much it affected me really until probably the last couple of years, like I always just said I had some anxiety, I'm just sad, I'm really introverted, so I don't go out, I don't meet people. I have a really small circle of friends, like small, like maybe 5 people, and even then a lot of them don't know the extent of my past. And I've delved into it with a few of them, and I've actually had a few of them stop me randomly and be like, I don't understand how you appear so normal, because I work really hard to appear normal and appear like everything is fine. That mask. And this last couple years has been pretty rough. Emotionally, I just kind of didn't know how to respond to stuff. I started like, I actually, like about 2.5, 3 years ago, I had a voyeur incident where the voyeur was actually a police officer in my city. And when I brought it up to the police, even though they believed me and they could place him at my house at that time, and I had my ex-partner at the time was also there and knew all about this, there wasn't enough to charge him.
Right.
So actually another trusted person that should be trusting wasn't. And he was actually ended up being charged on a different incident later on. So he did get taken out of his trusted position, but I was told that mine wasn't enough to do anything. And at that point, it really kind of set me off. We had to move immediately. I didn't feel safe. I started checking all my doors and windows at night. I would repeatedly wake up. I almost never slept. I was constantly on edge. Things that I still do is I have to be the one to drive places. If it's like a place like a mall, I probably won't go. I will order anything I can online. If I can go grocery shopping at 2 a.m., I will go grocery shopping at 2 a.m. so I'm not around people. Or now that they started introducing ordering online, that is like, yes, please. I rarely go out to big events. I will make excuses not to. If I do, I have to like really psych myself up. I have to be the one to drive. I have to be super hyper aware of the exits and what's going on. And I'm constantly on edge and hyper vigilance. Because like these moments will repeat out of nowhere. And I didn't even realize that this was happening. I didn't realize that me being anxious about all this stuff was due to all of that. Like,
right.
Other people have anxious moments and they can kind of push it out of their thought, these random intrusive thoughts as, oh, that's crazy, that would never happen to me. But all this stuff happened to me. So it's harder to push those thoughts aside. And then things like you could just be having a good day and a smell will get you and you'll be put back into that place or that time period and you'll feel small and unable to do anything. And then you start getting agitated or angry for no reason or sad and you can't explain it. Like even a few weeks ago, I had a panic attack out of nowhere. We were just sitting on the couch and I started sweating and I had beads of sweat and I was like, I feel really sick. I feel like I'm going to pass out. I don't know what's going on. And I just had to lay down for about 20 minutes. And then within an hour, I felt better and no idea what triggered that. It just happened. And then like I have constant nightmares. I sleep very, very little. I've been asking my doctor now for any type of med that I can get my hands on to try and sleep. And she's tried a bunch and none of them are working. And we've even tried now a different antidepressant and its main thing is that it can make you sleepy. I'm like, that would be great. I want to sleep. Like, this would be fantastic. I feel like all this would be manageable if I could just sleep. And that's been like a really big factor. Like, even when it comes to eating, sometimes it's not that I don't want to eat. I'll put food in my mouth and I can't swallow. And this goes back to back from when I was a child. And it's things like that that you don't realize affect you now. Like even now, like I'm playing with my rings. Well, I'll play with my elastic to try and deal with my anxiety and emotions. And like the way it affects me now is like, I don't know if I'm underreacting to situations or overreacting to situations. I'll think everybody's bad all of the time, even if they've given me like nothing that they're a bad person. I mistrust people that look like the people from my childhood that affected me, and that's not fair of me to do. Like they had nothing to do with it, but like I'll instantly have that distrust there and can't focus on that they're a good person because I relate them to those events, even though like they have nothing to do with it. And like I just started realizing how much that really does affect my day to day.
Well, I think you've been through an extraordinary amount. And thank you so much for sharing so many details with us, because there are so many people that are actually writing in right now that want to relay some comments to you. So I just want to tell you a little bit about what people are saying.
Sure.
So Matthew says, this sounds like the worst nightmare. And it's like having your free will taken from you. True freedom also includes mental freedom. Mental freedom is not having suicidal thoughts and panic attacks at all times. And then we've got Emily. And Emily says, I have dissociative PTSD from being shot from a suicide attempt. The last 4 years have been pure hell, and I feel all alone. And then we just have someone else named Julie, and she's saying, hell, that's what this is like. And I think she's referring to C-PTSD. And these people are reacting very strongly to what you're saying, because you're not alone. Your experience is shared by so many people that have been through so much. May I ask you, when you got removed from that situation, when you were able to remove yourself from the traumatic situation?
It wasn't actually until my brother, who was about 7 years older than me, and I was probably 18 or 19, he was in a drug frenzy, and I actually wasn't home then. And like the one solution my mom came up with to try and make me feel safe was to get me a lock for my door. Because instead of making him move out, because he was the adult at the time through this period, I was a child. He was in need, so therefore I didn't get any help. And he actually had an event where he slammed her up against the wall by her throat, cut my stepfather's face with a knife, and kicked in my door, even though I was not home, I was at work at this time, and asked where I was, because he had threatened to kill me at this point quite a few times, and had punched me in the head. And it was actually like I felt like I was living a horror film where you're like, this is all happening, and everyone's like, this isn't happening, and you're like, no, it's happening, and everyone's like, no, this is not happening, you're making stuff up. And then that happened, and he got charged. The police were called, and my mom dropped the charges and brought him home. And the day she brought him home, he looked at me and said, hey, Mel. And I called my sister. I started packing my stuff, and my sister said she would be there in 20 minutes. And I moved in with her. And that was when I really distanced myself from parts of my family. And then I moved a few provinces away about 8 years ago. And when I moved away is when I could really start to see that wasn't normal behavior. The way my mother reacted and behaved was not normal and was incredibly controlling. And I was able to distance myself. And then up to about 3, I still let her in my life here and there. And then she came to visit, and I have my own children now. And her behavior was so crazy that my 6-year-old at the time looked at me and said, hey, Mom, why is Nana acting like that? And I realized I was able to shield my kids so much from the crazy that was my life before, that this wasn't normal to them, that this wasn't a normal thing. And that kind of like, that was a sinking in moment where I was like, this is not normal behavior. Like, I do not want them around this person. I don't want them experiencing the same things I had to experience from their hands. And I removed her from my life. And at that point, I started to really feel way better. And that kind of happened around the same time as the voyeur incident about 2.5, 3 years ago. And so it was like weird, because I felt good in one way, I felt strong in a one way, but then I was having all these other symptoms, like not sleeping again and panic attacks and checking all my doors and locks. And like I'll do stuff that if I admit it, I feel crazy admitting this, but like I will hit a pothole and I will think I killed someone. There's nobody around on the road. I've never hit anyone. I've never been in a car accident. And I will think I killed someone, and I will drive around the block like 20 times until I like get out and take a video and show myself it's a pothole. I've dropped off my children to their father, because we're not together. And I've called them after going, hey, I know I just dropped the children off. can you tell me that they're there with you? Because I can have a hard time trusting my own brain to
Right.
believe what is there. And so it really started to sink in, like, just how abnormal I was behaving. Because most people don't do this. Most people go, oh, I hit a pothole. Crap, I hope my car's okay. Or the city sucks or whatever. And I go, oh, I heard someone. And like, I go to this in crazy extreme that isn't there at all. And it's because I would get told, like, in that incident, like, I'd be told growing up that I'm going to kill someone because I suck at driving, which I didn't. I've never been in an accident, but the person telling me that had been in 10 accidents. Um, the, like, all of my memories are wrong. Everything I say is a lie. Like, when you grow up thinking that, and it just kind of instills on, and then I haven't let a lot of people get close to me, like, very, very few. And I always use the excuse I'm introverted. I don't like to be around people.
Right.
When I realized I actually do crave that and I do want that, but I can't. Like, I have a hard time letting anybody get even remotely close to me, even on a friendship level. Like, people will extend their hand in friendship and I'll be like, nah, this person sucks. And I'll find like some random excuse that makes no sense and shouldn't be an excuse, but I'll be like, no, this is fine. And I'll just be like out. I'll just be done. I'm gone. And it kind of sucks.
It sounds like, you're dealing with so much stuff in the best way you know how. That definitely doesn't make you crazy. That makes you someone dealing with something really big, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah. And so someone named Haley asked, how are your children coping with your anxiety? And Haley says, mine notice my anxiety.
So my oldest can sometimes notice it, but because I share custody with my ex, I work really hard at appearing normal, like
Mhm.
incredibly hard. I don't let them see that I'm tired. I go above and beyond, like trying to do things with them. Like, I'm almost like overcompensating in a way. Like, I'm over involved in like school and trying to get out and do things and get them into when we when we could leave our houses, like aftercare programs and like going to
Mhm.
events and things that I didn't experience as a child because I was really like I wasn't allowed to do things as a child. That's like a whole different thing. And so like I've kind of overcompensated the other way, and I work incredibly hard. Or like I'll even tell them like now, I'll be like, hey, I'm having kind of a low day. How about we just sit and watch cartoons? And they think it's great. Like, we're sitting there and watching movies all day and eating popcorn and snacks. But it's because I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to do anything today. Like, I can't face the world. So I kind of use those moments where it's like I continuously I'll be like, okay, I can just hold it together until they go to their dads. Then they go to their dads, and I'm I'm fine. Like, they seem to be doing fine. Like, they're not showing any symptoms or signs or anything. So I hope so. That they're
So
good.
just one more question. And I
Mm-hmm.
just want to ask, how are you finding treatment? Because as I said earlier, you reached out about a year ago for help.
Mm-hmm.
How are you finding that? Is it helping you today?
At first, like the first therapist I saw, she did help in some ways, but I wasn't really getting anywhere. Like, it
Mhm.
wasn't really, there wasn't any really coping mechanisms that were happening. Nothing was going on. Um, and then I finally, in earlier this year, I reached out to my doctor, and then my doctor referred me to our provincial health, like mental health unit. And
Mhm.
so the counselor I have now is actually really great. She's um, doing something called ACT with me, which is
Okay.
like the acceptance therapy,
Right.
and giving me coping mechanisms to like ground myself in the moment when this stuff starts happening, and being able to process that, like, hey, these moments are going to go away, but I can control how I'm responding
Mhm.
to these flashbacks and these behaviors. So the big thing that we're working on is sleep. If I can get sleep, I
Right.
feel like this will be a lot better. And regular exercise and eating and drinking and the normal stuff. But I'm finding it a lot better with this therapist. We just mesh a lot better. She's making a
Mhm.
lot of sense. She gives me coping mechanisms to try, and she goes, is this working? Is this not working? And I find something that she told me was like, look at stuff at making away moves, like, or toward moves, and what's the values you want to go to. And so now I'm asking myself, is this a toward move or an away move? And if it's an away move, I go, well, why am I not, what am I doing? Like, why am I not doing the toward move? And then I start kind of like self-reflecting a lot more, and kind of focusing on those towards moves instead of sitting in the past. And so that's a big thing that I find that's helping. And I find like even the last month, there's been like big strides in like trying to forgive myself and moving forward, and just not living so much in those past moments. They still happen, but and it's harder at night, but I'm finding it's working. And that also might be because of the medication change as well. I've been on a new medication for about 3 weeks, and it takes about 4 weeks for this medication to work. And I'm finding it a lot more better, and to be able to cope with life.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, everything you've had to say has been so incredible. Greg wrote in to say you are so brave for being open, and I agree with Greg completely. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. I know you've helped so many people. Thank you so much.
No problem. I'm glad to help.
I want to let everyone know that we have a lot of information about PTSD and C-PTSD at HealthyPlace.com, and I really hope you'll check some of that out. So thanks again, Melanie. And today, at this point, I do want to talk to our second guest, and that is Dr. Harry Croft. Dr. Croft is a board-certified psychiatrist and the medical director at HealthyPlace. He's also an expert on PTSD, having done many research studies involving Vietnam War veterans. It's good to have you with us, Dr. Croft.
Thanks for having me. And what a gutsy presentation we just had. And I want to thank her for being so open and honest. I think what you did will help many, many people.
I agree with you.
You know, it's hard sometimes to understand that what I've been through, it does not make me alone, or does not make me a freak, or does not make me unlovable, untreatable. That when we hear the stories from others, like we just did, I think it helps us.
I agree completely. And she was very open and so lovely to be with us today. And she talked so much about her C-PTSD symptoms. And so I want to ask you, are these typical symptoms of C-PTSD, the ones she was discussing?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the common symptoms of PTSD that we think about are unwanted recall, whether it's in the form of thoughts or nightmares or flashbacks, which are nightmares that occur when you're wide awake, or things that spur recollections of what we've been through, like the voyeur that she ran into. The second cluster of symptoms is avoidance symptoms. So though we have all these symptoms, we try our best to avoid them, to not think about them, to avoid things that might make us think of them, to not want to talk to others about it, not want to get into therapy where we're going to have to talk about it. The third cluster of symptoms are negative thoughts, negative emotions, not wanting to socialize, say, with others, not wanting to be closer. If I do get close, to then push people away so I don't have to deal with that. To do what I can to not be close to others, to feel detached and estranged from others. And then the final cluster of symptoms is the hyper arousal, which include things like anger, irritability, and agitation, or things like insomnia, not being able to sleep well at night, as she described, being hypervigilant, always searching around for things that might happen to us. And all those symptoms form the initial cluster of symptoms from PTSD, regardless of what the cause is. But then what we know is that PTSD, especially that which the stressors last over a number of months or years and years, um, uh, those kinds of symptoms are often associated with other conditions like depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, dissociative identity kind of problems, anxiety disorders like panic and other things. So the symptoms are very complex sometimes, but the good news is that treatment really does work.
That is
The bad news is that if you do nothing to treat it, if you use the avoidance as your way of dealing with it, I'm just going to deal with it by not dealing with it because it's too painful, too difficult, too traumatic to deal with it. Uh, that doesn't help. And the bad news is these symptoms don't go away over time. You know, you mentioned
right.
I've worked not only with Vietnam vets, but Iraqi and OIF, OEF veterans. When I first started working with people with combat PTSD, they were Vietnam era vets who had been away from Vietnam by that time for over 20 years.
Right.
And yet their symptoms were terrible because the symptoms don't go away with just time and avoidance. And,
So
and
that
so I'm glad that she is getting help. And by the way, the help is not simply medication.
yeah.
And she mentioned that, and I'm glad she did,
Mhm.
because we don't have the medicine yet that fixes it. The example I used is if you got pneumonia, you got a cough and sweats and fever and chills, and you feel terrible all over. And you go to your doctor, and the doctor says, well, you got pneumonia. Well, no kidding. What are we going to do about it? You ask. And the doctor says, well, for your cough, we'll give you a cough syrup. For your fever, we'll give you Tylenol. For your muscles that are all cramping, we'll give you muscle relaxants. For your insomnia, we'll give you sleeping pills. And you look at the doctor kind of weird and you say, well, don't I need an antibiotic? Well, the reality is for PTSD and for many of the coexisting conditions, we don't yet have the equivalent of an antibiotic. So we often give people medications to treat the symptoms, but not the underlying cause. We
Right.
might use
So
antidepressants for depression and anxiety and sleeping pills and tranquilizers. None of those really deal with the underlying condition. And you mentioned we've done studies. We personally have been involved with over 5 new compounds for PTSD, none of which are working yet,
okay.
but there are some medications that show real promise. But as you know, the treatment is therapy, not medication. And I want to mention something that was important. She thinks her therapist uh, is on the right track, and that's important because therapy for PTSD and these conditions require that somebody um, trusts their therapist and will open up and participate because therapy isn't something that the therapist does to the patient. It's something that the patient and the therapist work on together. And I would encourage those people who are attending this Facebook presentation and others, if the therapy doesn't seem to be helping, don't go into avoidance mode and just say,
Right.
well, hell, they must know what they're doing. I must be so screwed up. No, nobody can help me. No, open up and talk to the therapist and say, look, I don't feel like what we're doing is working. And
Right.
it may be. The problem is that what you're trying is the wrong thing. Uh, the trying just to control the symptoms isn't enough. You need to control all the things inside that are driving the symptoms.
That sounds incredibly difficult and very challenging, but I know that people can get better, just like you said. I do have to wrap things up at this point, but thank you so much, Dr. Croft, for joining us. The information you gave us was extremely useful today. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you so much to everyone who is watching today. We will be back in another 2 weeks with another Facebook Live session. Watch the HealthyPlace Facebook account for the announcement on what that topic is going to be. My name is Natasha Tracy. Thank you so much. Goodbye and have a great day.